Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hope you can hear us well. My name's Myles. We'll introduce ourselves in a moment. I'm joined by Kyile from Litmos. Thanks very much for joining us. We're just going to wait for a minute or so. We don't want to pause for too long, but just because we know that change of the hour, people closing down the meeting, joining another, making sure you've logged on, etc. So if you could just bear with us, we'll get kicking off in a few moments. But thanks again for joining us. I'm looking forward to this session. It's a big topic. The skills challenge means lots of different things, as we'll talk about, to lots of different organizations, different roles, and different people. So we'll be sharing some of the research information from Fosway, some of the analysis that we've done with that, and also Kyile will be sharing perspectives I guess, Kyile, you'll introduce yourself in a minute, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but you'll be sharing information, I guess, and perspective from Litmos' point of view, but also as an HR professional, senior leader of an HR function as well, which I think is really good, and we're really lucky to have that sort of dual perspective. So yeah, that'll be great. So I think, we'll get underway so that you don't have to listen to me doing a bad warm-up act for any longer. But so we're here to talk through modern approach to overcoming the skills challenge. So let's just move through to the introductions. So I'm Myles Runham. I'm a senior analyst with the Fosway Group. Fosway is a European-focused analyst organization. We focus on HR and learning segments. I lead the digital learning practice. I joined Fosway a few months ago, so quite new to the business, but been working in digital learning for, very long time, actually. Since before it was called digital learning, it used to be called online, then it was interactive even earlier. So I spent a number of years running a consulting business in digital learning, and also worked at the BBC in online and media learning as well. So yeah, very happy to be joining you. Very happy to have been invited by Kyile and the team at Litmos as well. Kyile, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Myles. So my name is Kyile Stair. I am, as mentioned on the slide, the Chief People Officer here at Litmos. I am also new to role, similar to kind of Myles. As some of you may know, Litmos operates in the e-learning content business, LMS side of the house. And, we began a new journey here in December. So an exciting new time to be part of this organization. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today with Myles. I've had the opportunity to connect with him a couple of times over the past few weeks. And I feel like every time we chat, I learn something new and really look forward to the discussion today. And I know we have in the chat here, welcome to everyone. If you are comfortable, want to put in, where are you? Where'd you join us from today? I know I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Obviously, Myles is in London, so we'd love to hear from all of you as to where you're joining us today as well. But with that, Myles, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, do let us know where you're from. It helps us to give a bit of perspective, and hopefully I'll know some of the names as well. Wilmington, Delaware, I know I've heard of. Unfortunately, my American geography is weak, as is my British geography. In fact, we'll move through the slides as well. But do tell us, please, tell us where you're from. But also, as Kyile said, please do use the chat as we go through. We really want to make this conversational, not just between Kyile and myself, but with you as well. There's plenty of perspectives to share, questions to share as well. We'll do what we can to give our views, but we'd love to hear from you and for you to hear from each other as well. So we're going to go through this notion of skills as the underpinning of the modern employee experience, and also how that's sort of now playing out as a foundation for learning and development, and also HR and the strategic relevance of those. We're going to talk through some thoughts on how learning functions are responding to this, and to the fact that it's such a rapidly changing environment.
Hey, Myles, can you hang on just 1 second? I'm looking at the Q&A, and I see a couple of things. One, the attendee chat is disabled. Should it be?
Oh.
So maybe we can get a little bit of help with that on the back end if it is disabled for attendees. And then just we also are hearing that some people can't hear anything. So just want to make sure that that we're able to get some of that. So we do see a lot in the Q&A side.
Oh, I see. Okay.
If we can get the chat enabled.
So I can see, yes, someone said they can't. Yeah.
Working now. Okay, great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Whoever did that,
And
thank you very much.
in the chat, can you give us a thumbs up that you can hear us? Just want to make sure everyone can hear us as well.
Great. Is that okay?
Okay.
We don't want to just plow on if it's in
We can
silence.
hear you. Oh, fabulous.
Okay, good.
All right.
Okay, great. Let me just get down to the bottom of the chat so that I can keep up with it. It's scrolling too fast for me. Okay, I'll get back to the agenda. So yeah, we want to talk through. Thanks, Kylie. That was good. Good hosting, thank you. So we'll talk through the approaches and tools that are having impact, get your views on those as well, and this notion of an ecosystem of tools, and I guess tools and approaches as well, because this is by no means a singular problem or one that has a singular solution as well. But what we want to kick off actually to get a little bit of context from you. So we want you to do a little bit of the work to help us through the initial phases of the conversation. So if you could just quickly give us your answers to the poll. What's the most important features of the skills challenges in your organization? We've broken this down into 4 options. That clearly this is a simplification, but we'd just like to get a bit of a sense of a view from you of you know, what are the most significant challenges, assuming that you have those challenges, and to get a sense of how you see it in your organization. We've got some data that we'll share about you know, what the market looks like, at least the European market. So if you could just quickly have a look at that poll for us and give us your answer, and then we'll have a quick conversation about those. I think for me, one of the themes in the questions, I think, is practice. I'm quite interested in that. I don't want to sort of lead the conversation, but I think that feels like a really important place to focus, not the only, and it's probably more on the solution end rather than the analysis end. But I think that's something that feels extremely important. I don't know, Alex, and maybe if we could have a look at the poll results now. I think people should have had enough time to have a quick look. So what have we got? So identifying priority skills. So top is benchmarking the current levels, followed by identifying skills and the priority skills, surfacing learning at the right time. It's an interesting one, of practicing skills. So so a good spread of results. I don't know, Kylie, if you're surprised by that, or you think it's a pretty reasonable spread.
Yeah. Nope. It from my perspective looks about what I'm thinking as well. So.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose the practicing skills and surfacing learning on the solution end, but you obviously can't apply those solutions without the right data to diagnose and identify the challenge in the first place. Thanks everybody. That's good. We'll come back to some of these themes as we go through as well. So just wanted to share a few pieces of research from the Fosway's research bank. So this is from an HR realities research. So this is from an HR perspective on the skills challenge. And interestingly, I think this suggests, perhaps no surprise, or confirms that from an HR and people strategy point of view, skills is significant, not only because it contributes to the employee experience, but it has a really foundational point there. It's not just about developing the people capability and the organization's capability. It's about that sense of you know, a coherent and valuable experience as an employee, which is a really, really important point. It's an organizational context. Similarly, from an L&D perspective or a learning perspective, this digital learning realities research, again, European data, and this is interim results from the current study, which is completing in the next month or so. It shows that skills have very high priority from a learning perspective as well. Probably this is more about building skills. So this is more about perhaps, you know, sort of the people relevance for skills development. Again, it's just to emphasize this sort of high priority. It's an enduring priority. So it's been a high priority for a number of years now. It's a stubborn priority. It seems to be increasing, if anything, rather than reducing. But interestingly, some of the research that we've done again recently, it shows that it's not as simple as identifying it, and some learning functions have some challenges within their organizations in terms of meeting this overriding requirement for skills development, reskilling, upskilling, etc. And a lot of this is to do with the organization's commitment to supporting learning functions in developing the tools and tactics to meet the challenge. So this is about investing in the time for skills development, whether that's training or learning or not, and we'll look at other tools and tactics as well. Also rewarding skills development, and that's not necessarily just through reimbursement or career growth. It can be a number of different things, but also career planning around skills development. So that's the sense of that, from that benchmarking data that everybody was referring to in the poll, to then setting, the diagnosis up and giving people a sense of what skills development means for them, and for them in the context of the organization as well. So there's a challenge here for us as learning professionals and in the people professions to make sure that we're given the capability, I guess, and the relationships that can support our response to that strategic development as well. So it's not as simple as just having sort of called out the significance of it. And similarly, and perhaps again, I think that this data that we gathered here, this is from last year's survey. It suggests that there's kind of an overwhelming set of priorities in terms of sort of the nature of the kinds of skills that are required to be developed. So we can see here that we've got team and leadership skills at the top, where seen as very important by large majorities. But I think it's interesting to reflect here that there's all sorts of sort of flavor of skill here: people skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, there's professional skills, technical skills, and increasingly this sort of set of software IT system skills and digital skills as well. So there's a real blend and pressure to develop skills of all kinds. I think that means that people's interest in skills are not singular. So it's not just me as a lawyer and my legal skills. It might be me as a leader in the legal profession and the function. It's also then the project skills, the technical skills, and my team working and interpersonal skills as well. So there's a number of different layers and a number of different perspectives on that skills challenge, and the range as well. So I think it's kind of, it just, again, it sort of tells the story of the strategic, beg your pardon, the strategic significance and also that imperative as well. So we want to actually, it's a time for folks from all over the world here. See Texas, Kenya, etc., and from here in London as well. We'd like to get a view of, if you're looking at this diagram, is a way of laying out different approaches, I guess, and different tools, tactics, and methods to start to address the skills challenge in any organization, in your organization, or perhaps the organizations that you work with as a service provider. And you can see, I mean, this is, as we were talking about, it's a large scale and complex challenge. So you've got upskilling and reskilling through employability. There's issues here about the flexibility and fluidity of the organization. There's notions of measurement and metrics and data gathering. There's practice, project development. There's sort of projects that you can join. Then ongoing development. I think learning through the flow of work, learning through in your work is a really important one for skills as a theme. And then also onto that kind of pre-boarding and induction area as well. So what we've done here is just try to reflect that sort of the depth and complexity. Be interesting in the chat. So I can see that Fernanda said that org fluidity and teaming seems significant. Be interesting to see if others, are there points here that really resonate with you, that you recognize. Kylie, I don't know for yourself, which of these are the ones that really chime with you?
Yeah, from my perspective, and something that we talk about often is the upskilling and reskilling as it relates to how we take our current organization and our current employees and continue to provide them with the skills aligned to our business needs, and ensure we're tackling a couple different things with that as well, which is, career mobility. Should we be reskilling into new areas, keeping retention with really great subject matter experts in our organization, and again, really aligning the skills of our organization to the needs of our business. And so ultimately, as you mentioned earlier, impacting employee engagement in other areas. So that one stands out to me, one that we talk about quite often at Litmos, but would love to hear what other people are seeing as well.
Yeah, we've got, so I suppose there's some thoughts here on the job learning, getting work done, teamwork and feedback. And I think it's interesting that as you were saying, that sense of, not just learning, but that development in the work and in the workplace, development amongst your teams is really, really important. I think, from my experience of working with in learning and with my clients, it's been trying to sort of move the focus away from the kind of design and delivery of learning alone through to how that learning is then applied, but how it can be then it can be enacted and applied in the workplace. That feedback, as you said, and that context for following that learning throughout the sort of employee life cycle, as it were, as well. Those are really, really important themes. And I think obviously we've had some comments here about managers and leaders play a significant role, and can they set the tone, but they can also provide that those incentives and that feedback as well. One of the ways that we've been thinking about this at Fosway with the work we've done with both with providers and with corporate partners as well is sort of this notion of an ecosystem. And of components here. So these aren't single tools or single technologies. It's a range of these approaches. Try to highlight those which are perhaps sort of closer to learning, and so obviously that you can't really remove any of them. But this notion that we have to to get this right and to have the impact that people are calling for, whether that's upskilling, reskilling, or complete career change. It's about rethinking the work itself, but also how that work is done. And the teams that do that work. So it's kind of this three-layered, quite significant change, and how to design these components together so that they can accelerate that learning. A lot of this is to do with intelligence and data as well. So it's picking up data and treating data throughout that life cycle as well. It's not a simple thing. It's a long-term thing, but it's quite helpful to think of it in this sort of as a cycle, but also as an ecosystem of components. Should have said actually, just if people are trying to sort of take notes and keep up and screenshot, etc. We've got that you'll be able to download the slides at the end, so you don't need to sort of message over them now. So we'll highlight that at the end. You can come back to the slides so you can focus on the conversation and join it as well. So alongside, perhaps this is actually within that sort of ecosystem approach. This theme of agility is becoming extremely important, as you were saying, Kylie, and people are saying in the chat as well, that things are moving fast. So skills degrade, and this notion of a half-life for skills is increasing, and the agenda is accelerating for organizations, and then obviously for the people within them and the people trying to join them. And this sense of mobility has increased that pressure as well. So the notion for us as people professionals is this sense of agility is really important, and there's different methods that will apply to that, and we'll come back to those. But I think one of the most important points of that agility is that kind of constant sense of connection across the organization as well. So that's to do with the conversations you're having with people, but also the evidence and the data that underpins that as well. That's crucial so that you can kind of add intelligence to that agility. So we have another poll against that. So if we've sort of thought that we've looked a little at some of those the factors and the evidence, and also some of those themes. So what do you think in your organizations? Unfortunately, this is slightly unfair. We're only allowing you to choose one, but which of these do you think has the biggest impact on your skills, or do you know, in fact, has the biggest impact on your skills? Is coaching, management, managers, on-the-job assignments, buddying, mentoring, face-to-face training, online courses, excuse me, and informal learning resources, excuse me. So which of those from your experience is the most significant, or which of those are you finding the most value from? As I said, it is slightly unfair that we're only letting you choose one, but for the purposes of this exercise, just trying to keep it simple. So Kylie, again, just before I'll ask you unfairly, because I can see you, I can't see others. So you don't have to choose just one, but perhaps if you had to choose just one, which of these do you think you might choose? I think for me, I would have gone for on-the-job assignments if it were me.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
I think me personally, and what the journey that I have gone through in my own career development, probably the most impactful. Yes, I can take online courses, certifications, formal learning, and get that baseline. But where the skills really develop for me is on the job, doing the work, being in there doing it. So for me, that's what resonates the most.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, same here. I think that's from my personal experience. So let's see, what have we got in the results? So I think the top answer then is on the job. So in agreement, narrowly ahead of managers developing their people, buddying and mentoring, and then actually there's quite a big gap then between that and perhaps the more sort of learning delivery, face-to-face online courses and informal learning resources, and then coaching. So there's so there's a focus here on management impact and on that practice. I think it's quite interesting. So,
and I think here we see, Myles, again, the importance of the manager role coming into play, with 23%. So I know we won't lose sight in the chat or probably throughout the discussion around the importance that managers play in skill development and supporting our employees through that.
Yeah, so see, there's a comment actually about surprise managers developing their people because you can't necessarily rely on that. I think that's true. So not all managers are equal. Perhaps this is more of a sense of what should have that impact, and the potential rather than the reality.
Yeah.
If we go back to so I'll share with you then slightly different point of view from our research. So again, this is Fosway's digital learning realities research from last year. So this is amongst learning professionals and learning leaders, mostly European. So perhaps there's a different flavor from Europe and North America. I don't know, it'd be interesting. I'm not sure we have the data to test that. But this puts coaching much higher, actually, interestingly. Pretty much neck and neck with managers, and on the job assignments then still very strong. Perhaps a similar similar results across the remaining, but it is. I think what's interesting about this, and looking at other cuts of the data, it shows us that there is no single response. There isn't a silver bullet. There's no one tactic. It's about the range and the blend and that mix. But I think one thing that it does say, which I think is really, really important, is that learning, design, and delivery alone is insufficient, is not enough. And I think that's, as we've mentioned that already, and it's an interesting theme throughout the evidence to suggest that you need to have that practice and you need to have that feedback. And as you were saying, Kylie, as well, I think that sense of managers ideally they should know their teams well. They can offer that feedback in the context of the work as well, and the workplace and those priorities.
Yeah, and I think, Myles, as we think about coaching, and I see some of this in the chat as well, are we referencing coaching being done via certified coaches, being managers, being like where, what avenue, or where is this coming at the individual from, I guess? Is there more detail or perspective to share there?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think in this research we've separated coaching more as an activity or a source or a resource alongside and separate from manager activity. It's a slightly artificial distinction, but I think we were trying to just sort of maybe stretch the survey results a little bit there, because I think you're right that obviously the best managers have a lot of different ways of interacting and developing people. Part of that might be coaching, it may be challenge, it could be more formal intervention, it could be something at the sort of wrong end of the scale that is responding to poor performance in a clear and robust way, etc. So that I think you're right, and as people have reflected that managers could and should be coaches. I think what's interesting though, and perhaps this is for certain types of skills in certain contexts where a coach can be really helpful and valuable, and that's because they're separate from the management function, the manager relationship. I think there's value in coaching in that respect. And there's also a lot of organizations use coaching services to bring in objective and third-party points of view as well. So that might be points of view from other sectors, other geographies, or from other disciplines, and you can supplement the manager role with an alternative perspective from coaching, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that kind of external perspective, that removal of let me just seek to ask more questions and really pressure test on certain things with you, right? And really stretch you in that regard. So agree. I appreciate you sharing the difference delineation between that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's been a few comments actually. They're trying to keep up with them. This notion of safety and that ability to have freedom of conversation doesn't always matter, but in some instances is very significant.
Yeah.
And as I said, the point here is that there's no one size fits all. There's no single approach. And just to emphasize that, I guess, and I think that it's a simple point, but it's a very significant one. I think someone referenced it in the conversation here. It's not necessarily a secret amongst learning professionals that learning skills is not just fed by, it isn't just a matter of consumption, but very often, and particularly this is perhaps in more sort of traditional segments and sectors, and perhaps older, more traditional organizations, they believe that actually this is about assessment and delivery, and that sort of ticks, as someone said, sort of ticks the development box, but that's it's not enough. I think that point about stakeholder expectations and overcoming those is really significant as well. And perhaps I was reflecting on this earlier today, Kylie, actually, that looking through the slides, I think for me this is possibly the most important point. That for me, I'm not suggesting it is for everybody, but for me, I think the sense of building skills, there are many, but two really significant, almost like priority foundations, really, the sense of purposeful practice. So the ability to apply, test, check what you're learning in as much of a kind of live scenario or live environment, relevant environment. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. There might be, sort of safe spaces, sandboxes, scenarios, immersive experiences, all sorts of different ways of doing that, projects, etc. And alongside that, getting that sort of feedback and coaching as well to steer you, guide you away from your mistakes. But also, and someone else mentioned this, it's a sense of motivation, I think, from the progress you make and the positive feedback you get from that coaching or manager or both relationship is really significant. So this, I guess, if I had one slide to take away with me, this would be the one. But that's just me. So hang on. And I think, and I suppose this is partly sort of adding to that is a little bit of a sort of thought on some methodology, and this is something that we've discussed with a number of different service providers and their customers. Is this notion of what we've called learning sprints, and there's not necessarily a sort of any flash of inspiration here, but it's the notion that for ourselves in trying to keep pace. The idea of sort of this input, action, feedback, reflection as a loop, and hopefully as a rapid loop, I think it does a couple of things that are really helpful. One is just for us as practitioners, it can make sure that we have that feedback for ourselves, that we kind of honing in on what's most relevant and most useful for our organization, our stakeholders, and the employees and colleagues we're working with. But also it does the same for the organization and for those people we're trying to support. So you get the sense of feedback, which means we're listening, the moments of reflection for them as well, and then you can put that back round for them as they go through this kind of hopefully quicker cycle of skills development. It's not always easy to get right. It's not always easy to sort of change modes in this way, but I think it can be a very, very helpful, particularly against this challenge of the accelerating skills challenge, it's on the accelerating sort of skills environment, I guess. And so we're going to sort of shift a little bit. Actually, maybe I should go back. It could be interesting just to sort of get some views. Again, I don't want to miss the chat. So more support for coaching. I think that's right. I think again, or I suppose it's for feedback. I think it's for coaching as a method, not necessarily coaching as a role, perhaps. I think that's right. So I think that's an important thing. There was something I missed. Sorry, Kylie. There was something. I'm just going back to the chat. I'm thinking there was something I no, I can't find it. Sorry, I don't want to pause. But what we'll do is we're going to switch now from. So we've looked at some of those at the challenges. We're going to look now for a little while at what some of the tools to accelerate and scale. And I think those probably the notion of accelerating and scaling can sometimes be at tension. Sometimes to do things quickly, to do them at scale, there's a bit of a tension there. I think some technologies, and we'll come to this later, there's some sort of technological developments which are helping us in that respect. But I think we want to share some thoughts on those, the steps that can be taken here. So again, this is no need to write notes across this. It's quite a detailed diagram, but this is one of the ways that we try and encourage organizations to think is obviously I think a person-focused learning solution strategy kind of seems like a sort of straightforward approach. But what we try and emphasize here is, again, it's the sense of balance of formal learning is significant and very, very important, along with workplace learning, and particularly I think these different forms of collaborative learning, which we've discussed. That's teamwork, it might be in cohorts, it may be coaching, it might be feedback, and it weaves together the learning experience then, and that might be different sort of tools and systems with the workspaces and the tools and the context of work, also with the workflow as well. Again, it's to bring the learner to the center of those. So it's about the learning experience. It's about the places that you work, and obviously the places that we work have become more complex in the last few years. I know I'm working from home here, but that we'll also be spending time next week with with colleagues in meetings, etc., physically. So, and also the impact on the workflow and the tools of the workflow as well. And I think that last point about the workflow is quite significant from a technology perspective, in that the notion of learning in the flow of work is very significant and highly important, but we don't want to necessarily only look at our own tools from the learning perspective. Learning technologies are significant and important, but they need to be matched and used alongside the other tools and technologies that people have in their normal flow of work as well.
Yeah. Myles, this is actually one of my favorite slides. I know you
spoke
about slides earlier, but this one for me is just, as I think about, the overall, the strategy around it, and seeing how much goes into that, and how it's, as you mentioned, not just one component, one facet, one area. There's so much that goes into how people learn, how we need to help them all learn as well. This is one of my favorites. So, I just wanted to call that out also.
Yeah. Okay, good. We're all allowed to have a favorite. No, it's a good one. I think this. I think one of what this does well is it tries to sort does quite a good job of condensing and drawing in all those different themes. I think which is really helpful. I think it's been interesting. There's been a couple of comments in the chat that sort of slightly at tension with each other. Maybe someone's talking about the informal nudging and coaching from peers and teams, which is really important. At the other end of the spectrum, perhaps, is some senior leaders who are a bit more stuck, find it harder to break their own habits, aren't as ready for that coaching relationship. I think that's really important. I think finding, I suppose for me personally, finding the places that are most ready and your kind of closest allies and sort of warmest friends in the organization can be a great place to start. I think it can be very difficult to try and persuade people, who have a significant interest in carrying on with the status quo. They're not necessarily going to change just because you ask them. I think showing momentum, demonstrating change in smaller ways, and then expanding that can be one way of scaling as well, that kind of bottom up, which I think is really important. But again, it's a sort of similar approach to those agile methods as well.
Yeah.
So there's a question, what are teams of teams? I guess that would be the notion, Matt, that we are very rarely only in one team, so a team can be part of a larger team, or a squad or a project, etc. And teams kind of they overlap and they map onto each other, but also teams come and go as well. So there's no sort of single definition of team to fix onto. And again, so Kyile, you had some thoughts to share on this notion of rehearsal and practice as well. So I'll hand over to you for this one.
Yeah, and I'm just going to share my own personal experiences and thoughts. And so would love to hear what you might be doing at your organizations also around rehearsal and practice. So it's, I think, part of generating ideas is in sharing that. So by no means, what's on the slide is the end all be all, but just some thoughts from my perspective and the roles that I've been in. So as we think about how to rehearse, how do we practice the skills that we are getting exposure to learning? Video assessments, I think, is an interesting tool, and one that's probably been talked about here in the industry for a while. An example of a video assessment, something that we use at Litmos ourselves, we have a video assessment tool AI, where essentially, an individual, maybe in a sales organization, you're talking about pitching or learning specific skills on how to sell to a certain customer base. You can record, your pitch deck, your demo, etc., and you can get feedback on it right away through machine analysis scoring. So, what was your tone like? Was it positive? Was it negative? What's your speed of talking? Are you too fast? Are you too slow? What keywords did you use that you should be using, or words that might be triggers? And so, getting some, I think this is a very interesting and very real tool that can be leveraged in very specific types of roles as well. So video assessments is something that we've started to see more and more of out there in the world. Practicing through a sandbox environment, right? Are we creating these? I think, Myles, you mentioned it earlier, but are we creating these kind of safe places for our employees to practice, to build before you put something into production? And so again, having that environment and that space to do so before go live. I also am very keen of peer-to-peer learning, and I think a couple of people have mentioned this as well. So I think it's a very common theme that we're seeing for those of us who work, within the people space, broader people space. So how are we, as an organization, though, how are we setting up our business to create these opportunities for our employees? So some of it could happen naturally, but we also have to be more intentional about some of this peer-to-peer learning and the types of programs that we're building as we think about learning and development. And so are we, creating job shadowing opportunities, formal job shadowing opportunities, informal? Are we talking about buddy systems, which I think are really important, as part of onboarding and stuff as well? And in other opportunities where we can learn from our peers. And so peer-to-peer learning, I think it's great to see it in the chat. One that I am a personal fan of also. Learning in real time, which I think is an interesting concept too, and one that we talk about at Litmos. So, we actually have a tool within our own capabilities called Boost, and this is something that can send assessment questions. So essentially boosts the learner outside of a course. It's not within a course, but outside that course, after completion, an LMS admin can create really at specified intervals. After this person's completed the course, these assessment questions afterwards to really continue to help with the retention of what you've learned, reinforce your learned materials. So, it's not a one and done, as we all know. You don't take a course, a formal learning course or anything and say, that's it, I'm great, I'm good to go. So how are we continuing to practice and get these knowledge reminders over time as well? So interesting concepts to think through. Practice quizzes, I think, these are very practical when it comes to formal learning or e-learnings, when we think about how we practice before the final certification, so I think that one's pretty straightforward. And gamification, of course, so how are we creating as learning organizations, people organizations, these environments that are fun, that they're creative, they're competitive, and people are learning, specific skills, and getting the chance to develop in maybe a not so formal way as well, or not known to be a formal way. So, keeping it fun and interesting, I think, is a really important thing also.
Yeah, it's a really, excuse me, it's a really important part of that sort of challenge of ongoing relevance, I think, is, you need that sense of, fun, engagement, interest is really important. Never at the expense of the content and the outcome, but it's really important. Yeah. I think the video assessment's becoming, it's really interesting theme that I think you can imagine that even if just a couple of years ago it might have been a source of anxiety for people, but I think it's becoming almost expected in some places now. It's really interesting as well. And I think it's really interesting how accurate some of that data that's gathered, the automated data sources and the AI and machine learning can be analyzing sentiment, and appropriate responses, and giving you a sense of benchmarking. It's really interesting what, the sort of the data sets that are emerging now as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Great. As we
Thank
move
you very
into,
much.
yeah, and I think we're going to move into, how we enable feedback. And so again, some more thoughts from my perspective and, the roles that I've been in, more on the people side of the house, but how we look at feedback and reflection. So we go through, we're, working on learning the skills. We're, kind of going through that process of getting, practicing and all of that. And so, feedback and reflection. So this can be done, of course, through assessments, right? Whether it's, a multiple choice, a true false, 360s, assessments I think are fairly common out there. Some of my personal favorite are communities and discussion forums, which I think is very much something like what we're doing right now. How can we ask others? How can we learn from others? How can we pressure test or pulse check some of our ideas and, what we're doing outside the organization, maybe not necessarily with those who are in our own bubble, how we get that feedback from others. So, I'm curious too, like what sort of communities or discussion forums are some of you involved in that you're leveraging, maybe specifically around the skills topic or maybe just other types of topics. But I think communities, discussion forums to get feedback, to reflect on some things are an important component. Also, how do we share through the training accomplishments? And again, I think this ties a little bit into, feedback of the discussion forums, et cetera. But, at Litmos, we have badges, so say you've completed a certain training or whatever. And I think we see this as fairly common in a lot of the industry. You'll probably see them a lot on LinkedIn, et cetera. But how, when you complete something, can you share internally in your organization, your completion, your accomplishment, and then externally, such as LinkedIn, as mentioned. And it's really ways to demonstrate your achievement, but then to connect to others who maybe see that and say, "Wow, that was really great. Where can I learn more about that?" Or "I've done the same. Like, let's connect and share." And so I think continuing to build networks around your own skills and accomplishments, I think, is important as well. And then coaching, our favorite, which I've seen in the chat a lot, coaching and mentoring. And really, my thoughts on coaching in particular is in how I've been coached in the past, whether it's through a manager, but an outside source, is really people who are asking those probing questions, who are really ensuring that you're taking time to reflect, that challenging you to think about things a little bit further than maybe you already would have. And so, coming at it from a different angle than maybe what your manager is coming at it from, and really just continuing to challenge the status quo and ask those whys, or what would you do, or how would you think about this differently if X, Y, Z? And so that's where I see the power of coaching really coming into play as we think about feedback and reflection.
Yeah, I think that point of challenge is really important, Kylie. I think it's a really important part of that, the coaching relationship, whether it's with a coach or a manager, that sort of appropriate challenge, holding people to account on, their commitments and objectives, but also I think just being challenging with robust feedback, but useful feedback is really, really important. I think yeah, it's really significant. It's interesting. There's a bit of a discussion on sort of the pros and cons of sharing externally. I think I'm always, I suppose on a personal level, I've always been a fan of it, usually through LinkedIn and Twitter. But I know that it's sometimes people can perhaps not quite understand the validity. I suppose wouldn't want to overplay it, but I think it's a significant part, partly just to sort of celebrate your achievements, but also it can be another source of feedback as well. As you share something on your your LinkedIn feed, and having that external perspective is really important, and part of it's building an external network, which is always valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm getting at too, right? Is like how you can, one, celebrate your own accomplishments, but two, then how that ties into continuing to network and be connected into these communities that may be relevant to the skills that you're developing. And so I see it from that regard.
Yeah, I think so. And as Steve's just mentioned, actually, the notion of accreditation services and platforms are a really important part of sharing those, I suppose, more sort of formal and certified moments of accomplishment as well, which is clearly again, perhaps that's what they're for. In fact, wanted to just sort of again, I suppose this is sort of taking us back to some of the themes from the beginning. Really, it's sort of that we need to sort of be conscious of connecting learning into the wider people processes of any organisation. That that learning and in the activities that plan, design, deliver, and then monitor and encourage that feedback are really significant. But they'll only have as much impact as they need to have as much impact as they can by being part of that, the operating environment of the HR sort of functions in the organization, not just functionally, but across the various different areas of HR and service development. The skills is a thread that runs across them, but it can be co-managed and co-owned by other HR functions as well. So it's just really important to think about this sort of balance of integration and intelligence, the kind of data that you gather from people analytics, and then the employee experience and learning and development analysis, etc. But it's about being part of that overall consistent plan. And the consistency is a really significant part of this, actually, and particularly in larger organizations, it's really important to have a consistent taxonomy, set of definitions, levels, a clear sense of achievement, clear sense and benchmarks of achievement, so that the employee feels like they're having a single development experience that contributes to a single set of goals, rather than that sense of fragmentation, which can be a barrier and a source of frustration as well. So I think it's just an important note, really, that none of us are in this alone. We have that responsibility to employees to make sure that's sort of singular and consistent. And I suppose on a similar vein, and I think I lifted this, Kylie, this quote from you, actually, of meeting people where they are. I stole this from you.
I was wondering where that came from.
Yeah.
I thought that was it resonated with me.
It was because it was from your very lips that said it. So, but theft is a compliment in this instance. So I think the sense of meeting people where they are is really important. So this builds on that theme of employee focus and employee personal relevance. But it also, I think, starts to then balance that with the context of the organization as well. So it's about relevant for me now with my goals, but it's also relevant for me now with my goals in the context of the organization, the goals the organization has, commercial strategy, it may be customer service outcomes, it may be customer advocacy, it could be efficiency, all of those organizational and business drivers that give us part of that where we are as individuals. There's obviously a number of different components to this. There's cultural elements, there's sort of operational elements, and there's a sense of sort of value and of people outcomes. I think one of the ones that I think is from my experience, which is perhaps this is a sort of about design and designing processes and systems and designing learning as well, is this focus on motivations and needs and that sense of personal relevance. I think for me, that's the very heart of meeting people where they are. Is it can be as simple as using the language that they use to describe an outcome or a project. It can be understanding, the dynamics of their role and the, the context of what's happening in their department or their business function. It can be, it can be as simple as, just sort of recognizing people by first name. Or there's lots of different signals that help us understand where people are and what's relevant to their motivations and needs. And then we can use those signals to show that we understand as well. And I think that's a really kind of at the heart of making those good design decisions for me. So I just wanted to make sure that emphasize that. Again, I call it a design challenge. It's not just learning design, it's about the design of the whole experience, I think, and that sense of interacting with people throughout their life cycle as well.
Well, I've changed my mind. This is now my favorite slide.
Oh, okay. You can have more.
This one's now my new favorite slide.
Okay, good. That's good. It's because it's got your quote on it, isn't it?
Yes.
And so more on that sense of personalization, support there for you, Kylie, as well.
Yeah, I think just really expanding on this personalized learning journeys, target experiences. So as I think about this in the role that I'm in within the organization that I'm in, I think personalized learning journeys, as Myles just talked about, are extremely important because it's not a one size fits all for everyone. We're not all coming in at the same place with skills. We're not all developing skills at the same rate. We don't have the different, one gap in one with one individual may be different for another. And so really personalizing this journey for everyone is extremely important. And so when we talk about individual training for roles, and we think about this within our own organizations, of understanding, first of all, what skills do we need in our organizations by role? So how are we doing an assessment, in a baseline of that process of, if our business goals are XYZ and our business challenges are XYZ, here is what we need to get delivered out of our sales organization, customer success organization, etc., to deliver on those. And so understanding then what skills are required in each of those roles and going through this needs analysis and then ultimately a gap analysis, which is where you can identify maybe one person's skills may be different than another's for where we need to teach and train. And this is where this individual training starts to come into play. I also think about this of enabling learning in the flow of work. So again, meeting people where they are can also be, how do we teach and train on skills and the tools that they're already working in? So I am a sales individual. I'm probably doing a lot of work in a tool like a Salesforce. How can we think about embedding some sort of tips and tricks and learnings within these types of other tools that people are already working in to get us real-time, just-in-time feedback, etc. Again, I think we all recognize if we're coming at it from a learning role today, or you're coming at it from a people role, or just understanding the industry, we only have so much time to spend on formal learning or types of learning. We have compliance training we all have to take, we have our day-to-day roles to deliver. And so how are we creating and getting the best return on our investment of the time we're spending and asking people to spend on learning, right, outside of their day-to-day job? So meeting people in the tools they're already in, I think, is an important and interesting way to think about it. Litmos does have an integration with Salesforce. So there are tools out there that can help you with some of this and help remove those barriers of needing to get into separate tools to do formal learning versus, maybe I lost a deal, I need some feedback or a quick competitive battle card about XYZ in my role with my skills, etc. Meeting people where they are. And then there's individualized development plans. I think, Myles, again, you mentioned, how are we aligning development plans and skills development to the needs of the business? So again, creating not just a skills development plan, so an individual training plan, but an overall development plan for each person as well. And so I think we go back to quite a few of those slides that show that learning comes in many, many, many different ways. And so maybe we're looking at skills plans in particular embedded within our development plans, but this continuous feedback loop like we're talking about, and of course the importance of managers in this, of getting the feedback, practicing, going, continuing, having something they're working towards, that they're accomplishing, achieving, sharing that. And so really, I find it also, we talked about, we can't necessarily just rely on managers to upskill, reskill, train their employees. There is a sense of ownership on each individual as well to own your own career journey and your own path, and really providing that feedback around what else is out there for them to learn based off the assessments that they've done and the research that they're getting for themselves. So just a couple of thoughts on my end. Would love to hear any others in the chat as well. But back to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Kylie. There's something you mentioned, actually. I think that's this really interesting sort of point about this sort of sense. You mentioned this at the top, the sense of challenge of time. So that, I don't have time for the learning or for the formal learning. I think it's really interesting. I think one of the things that we've seen is this notion of digital learning fatigue. There's switch to online content and Zoom back in the early days of the pandemic at the beginning of 2020 I think it's sort of equated learning with screen time like this, and this is our work time. So there's a sense of sort of lack of variety there. I think one of the things that can be interesting though is that what people define as learning as well. So in an organization context, people often define it as formal sort of training and learning and development time, whereas I think so much of what we've been talking about throughout this conversation has been that, but also informal conversation, a constructive and a conversational relationship with your line manager, coaching and mentoring relationships, tools and resources to use in your own time, the flow of work. So actually so much of what you can offer that's really valuable doesn't actually have to encroach on that definition of time.
Yeah.
We just need to sort of perhaps reframe the way we think about it and reframe the way we talk about it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this concept of formal learning, like you're talking about. I specifically need to develop this skill for this role I'm in and this business need and this outcome, etc. And then, but as we talked about, there's so much more to learning and how we learn and how each person learns. I'm a big fan also of these micro learnings, little things, different channels, different ways in which we're learning. A podcast, an article, something like this, a channel such as this, a quick conversation with a peer that I'm having around XYZ. Like, it comes in so many different ways. And so, I agree. And how we spend our time, and that's really important.
Yeah, and I think when we're thinking about skills and upskilling and reskilling, quite often for a large number of skills, not for all of them, but this can be a journey of over years as well to really from first from a sort of zero base through to real confident mastery of a skill takes a very long time, and that can't be done in a 3-month program or a 2-week program. It has to be done in stages and feedback, and so a sense of sort of managing expectations and being realistic is really important as well. Yeah. I've got a couple of further slides I'm sort of interested. I'll go through them now. I think we want to end up with a little bit of time for Q&A at the end as well. So maybe to change the pace a little and think about. And interestingly, so in my experience in the last 6 months, this has been the first time we've not mentioned the words artificial intelligence until the very end of a conversation. It seems to be something that you have to talk about at the beginning these days. But I want to reflect a little bit here on the roles of technologies in linking skills journeys and opportunities. So this is really from this sort of the rapid development of skills, AI-driven skills marketplaces or job and opportunity marketplaces. A little bit of sort of building an individual profile, how these tools can then use different sources of inference and validation from various from a bewildering array of data sources internally, externally, etc. To then add the sense of priority leveling opportunities, then plotting your skills graph, that sense of using skills intelligence to give you a sense of where you are, where you want to be, where you are relative to your organization or others in your field, matching and recommending opportunities to practice and develop those skills, hopefully in those sort of safe spaces that we were talking about earlier as well. And then that from all of that data, recommendations for support and growth, and doing it well with this sort of sense of individual empowerment and for growth, and then so on. So it's really interesting now to see there's lots of very interesting sort of technology and AI developed businesses that are really starting to accelerate organizations' capabilities in responding to this, bringing in those large data sets to add to that sense of direction for the organization, but also for us as individuals. I think it may be an obvious point for some, but it's one to watch, I think, and there's some interesting businesses to benchmark there.
Yeah.
And really, this is a kind of, I suppose, as a concluding slide, and this is a sort of final thought, really, but not necessarily a closing thought, is that I think we also need to be be cognizant, rather, of for ourselves, is that the skills for us that got us here aren't the ones that are going to get us where we need to be. That things are changing rapidly in the learning field, in the HR field, so we need to be alive to our own skills development, to the challenges of not clinging on to our, the skills that we like best. I think people have mentioned comfort zones and throughout the chat as well. So we need to challenge ourselves to make sure that we keep our skills up to date. We find the opportunities to practice them. We push for our development opportunities, etc. as well. So that's just sort of as a closing thought on a personal note, but I think as sort of thinking of the learning profession, the people professions, that we need to make sure that we we keep pushing ourselves as well.
Yeah, and I think again, that's why I come back to that upskilling, reskilling comment I made earlier. Is constantly evolving. The needs of the business is constantly evolving. The industries are constantly changing, and we as leaders and these industries need to stay abreast of these types of skills that we're seeing come to the forefront, like you showed earlier, Myles. Like, it's important that we understand the trends, what's happening, really understand AI, ML, what's going on out there as well, and how we're pivoting and continuing to focus on maybe some of these soft skills. I heard the other day in an own webinar that I was in, this concept now of power skills, which is a different way to talk about soft skills. So staying abreast of those, I think, is really important, because I think you're spot on. The skills that got us here are not going to get us where we need to be. So I think it's a great way to kind of close out there.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Kylie. Yeah, so I think we've got a couple of minutes left for Q&A. If people can hang on for a moment. I think we've got Alyssa joining us. I think, Alyssa, there may be things that we've missed in the chat. It was moving quite quickly at times, or if there's anything from the Q&A, we've got a couple of moments to address those.
Yeah, absolutely. So one that was in the chat early on was interesting how the industry is aligned on the need for leadership and management skills. Wonder why so many see this as a primary skills gap. Myles and Kylie, if you want to just tackle that one.
Yeah, go on, Kylie. You go ahead.
Just so I understand, they said, why is it important for management leadership skills that it keeps coming to the top?
It's one of the top skills needed right now. So just an interesting perspective from your two point of views.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to a little bit of those soft skills, power skills I was talking about too. And we think about how things are constantly evolving and types of skills required in the industry, but what's most important to help people on that change of of the change you're going through are these leadership skills to help individuals navigate this change of this, upskilling, reskilling, changing environments of new tools we're learning, all of that, right? How we have strong leadership skills that focus on strong communication, strong change management, strong feedback, that I think is never going to go away in that sense. We constantly need that type of relationship and that type of a skill in the workplace. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I suppose I'll just try and give a quick answer before we wrap up. I guess you could be as a bit of maybe British cynicism here, say, well, leaders and managers are the ones that give us our learning budgets, and they have a sort of an interest in it. That might be true. You could also cynically say that actually leadership and management skills are often not what they could be and should be. I think some of those things are true, but I think it's also, as you were saying, Kylie, that these are such influential skills on the development and people agenda that that they have to be, like you said, like a foundation for so much else. And I think from the conversation we were having as well, for good leaders and good managers, then they become engines of skills development through their own styles of leadership and their feedback as well. So I think for us in the skills debate, actually, I think there's a kind of very strong case for them being placed where they are. Thanks. I think we're probably slightly over time now, Alyssa, Kylie, so I think we should probably let people go. I think they've probably got to get on to their next meetings, but thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for a really good debate in the chat. A great conversation, Kylie, for Alyssa and Alex for hosting and organizing us so well. As I said, that I think if you can go to the handouts button on the top right, I think, of your screens, you should be able to download a PDF of the slides as well, because we went through quite a lot of material there. So hopefully that'll be a useful reminder and resource for you. And thanks again, everybody, for what was a really interesting conversation. And I think we packed quite a lot into what was a very short hour in the end. So thank you very much, Kylie.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Myles. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.